Before we begin today's episode, I want to acknowledge something different about this moment. This isn't just another case. This is a special episode of the Passport to Crime podcast. My name is Oakley, and today is one that marks the 20th anniversary of the 7/7 London bombings. On July 7th, 2005, 4 coordinated suicide attacks targeted London's transport system during the morning rush hour, taking 52 lives and injuring over 700 others. It was a day that reshaped Britain, and its impact is still felt 2 decades later. What you're about to hear contains graphic descriptions of terrorist violence, severe injuries, eyewitness accounts, and emotionally distressing details. We will be sharing survivor stories and reflecting on the legacy of a national tragedy, with the respect and care it deserves. Please be advised, this episode includes content that may be triggering for some listeners. If you're sensitive to discussions of death, trauma, or terrorism, please take caution. This is not an easy listen, but it's one we believe is important. The morning London stopped. We're in London. The month is July 7th, and the year is 2005. And it began like any other Thursday. The clatter of teacups in the kitchen, school children kissing their parents goodbye before they head to school, men and women disappearing into the bustle of train platforms, with briefcases and bags in hand. The underground breathed in thousands that morning, unaware they'd be stepping into history. At 8:50 a.m, 4 coordinated suicide attacks shattered that normalcy. In less than an hour, 52 people would be murdered, more than 700 injured, and millions forever altered. This is the story of 7/7 bombings. 20 years later, with every tremor still echoing through the tunnels of memory. A world on edge. To understand 7/7 properly, we have to return to a time when the world lived in fear of shadows. 4 years after the collapse of the Twin Towers, terrorism had become a constant on the global stage. The United States had invaded Afghanistan, then Iraq. The United Kingdom had followed, and the consequences were festering back home in London. Intelligence services monitored growing whispers, emails, radical clerics, suspicious travel, but nothing concrete. G8 leaders were meeting in Scotland. The city was tense but functioning. The threat level was present but not palpable to the everyday commuter. The London Underground, an intricate maze of history beneath the streets, offered millions a sense of routine. That morning, it became a tomb. Let's take a look at the bombers who orchestrated the 7/11 bombings, from neighbours to martyrs. Mohammed Sadiq Khan was 30 years old and a teaching assistant, a mentor to local youths in Beeston, Leeds. Shahizad Tanweer was 22 and a former cricket player. Jermaine Lindsay, a 19-year-old convert, and Hasib Hussain, the youngest, just 18 years of age. These weren't foreign infiltrators. They were born or raised in Britain. They ate Greggs, they laughed with friends, they prayed, and they plotted. Over months, they formed a pact, not of survival, but of martyrdom. Under the influence of radical ideology, they believed their deaths would give voice to Muslim grievances worldwide. In a chilling video that would later surface, Khan speaks into the camera with calm conviction. Our words have no impact, so our actions will. Then there's the journey from Leeds to King's Cross. At 4 a.m, the 4 left their homes, smiling, joking, wearing bulky backpacks filled with hydrogen peroxide-based explosives. The train from Leeds to Luton carried them past unsuspecting passengers. By 7:21 a.m, they boarded a Thameslink service to King's Cross, blending with 1,000 early risers. CCTV at the concourse caught them. 4 men, side by side, heads low, no visible fear and no hesitation. They hugged, they separated. It would be the last time all 4 were seen together alive. Then there were 3 explosions in 50 seconds at 8:50 a.m. Silence, then rupture. The first blast struck the Circle Line eastbound train between Liverpool Street and Aldgate. Tanweer detonated his device in the second car. 7 people were killed instantly, almost simultaneously. A westbound Circle Line train leaving Edgware Road became a massacre when Lindsay's bomb exploded. 6 perished in the blast. Many more were shredded by the flying shrapnel. Moments later, between King's Cross and Russell Square on the Piccadilly line, Khan detonated his charge in the most devastating attack of the day. 26 lives extinguished. The train itself crumpled like a can. The lights went out, and all I could hear was screaming. One survivor later recounted, "I saw shoes, hair, pieces of people, and I had no idea where my own legs were." Then, at 8:53 a.m, the Tavistock Square bus bombing. Above ground, confusion had begun to ripple across central London. The underground was being evacuated, with many assuming a power fault or technical failure. Commuters emerged into sunlight, annoyed and unsure, but safe. That sense of temporary relief would vanish just 3 minutes later. Hasib Hussain, who failed to board the same underground trains as the other 3 bombers, wandered the streets around King's Cross Station. CCTV captured his movements as he attempted to regroup, buying a battery at WH Smith's, boarding and then disembarking from buses, checking his device. At 8:53 a.m, he boarded the crowded number 30 bus at Euston Station. 20 minutes later, while the bus idled at Tavistock Square, he detonated his backpack. The sound was enormous. Then I saw something in the air. Red, grey cloth. I realised it was the top of the bus. Witness on a passing bike recounts. The explosion tore the vehicle in half, killing 13 people, injuring dozens more, and throwing body parts into surrounding trees. Papers from the British Medical Association building fluttered down like snow. Then the response begins. Sirens, screams and smoke. Within minutes, the city's emergency infrastructure was stretched thin. Ambulances converged from every borough. Firefighters in breathing masks descended into darkness, and police officers set up rolling cordons, then extended them as more blasts were confirmed. Medical triage zones were established in the streets. Office workers used belts as scarves as makeshift tourniquets. In the tube tunnels, rescuers faced a surreal battlefield, scorched bodies still strapped in seats. Some with limbs missing, but eyes blinking. I crawled toward a woman whose legs were gone. She held my arm and said, "Please don't leave me." I didn't. We waited together. That's a paramedic's account, published years later after 7/7. Some victims were unrecognisable. Identification would take days. DNA became the only certainty. The city was in complete shock, and then the breakdown of communication. For many Londoners, the horror was unfolding in silence. The mobile networks collapsed, congested or shut down by emergency override. A complete digital blackout. Friends couldn't reach family, offices went into lockdown, rumours swirled, more bombs, chemical attacks and sniper fire. Television and radio filled the gap. The BBC scrambled to confirm. Was it terrorism? Was it over? I tried to call my mum from the bus. Nothing. I thought maybe it was just my signal. Then the news came through. Someone had bombed a bus. I dropped my phone and screamed. That was a survivor's testimony from Aldgate. Social media, still in its infancy, could not carry the emotional weight. The silence was deafening. Now let's take a look at the stories from the tunnels and the individual courage. In moments of darkness, some refused to surrender to chaos. Commuters became caretakers, and strangers became lifelines to those they'd never met. A nurse from Hammersmith, bleeding from her own wounds, performed CPR on 2 injured teenagers for over 40 minutes in the Piccadilly tunnel. 2 women linked arms to search for survivors through the smoke, their blouses tied around their faces like makeshift gas masks. A blind man led out of the train by the voice of a young girl, later described her as my angel in a world that suddenly vanished. I thought I'd die in that carriage. Then someone touched my shoulder and said, "You're not alone." That was the survivor's testimony from King's Cross. And then the recovery begins. A morning becomes history. By 11 a.m, all 4 blasts have been confirmed. Prime Minister Sir Tony Blair, attending the G8 in Scotland, issued a sombre statement. They will not succeed in destroying what we hold dear. Emergency services continued their work into the night. Hospitals reported blood shortages, volunteers queued for hours to donate. Forensics teams began collecting evidence, fibres, electronics, human remains, all in suffocating heat and dust. We didn't cry. We didn't speak. We just worked. It was the only way not to fall apart. That's a forensics technician's account at Adelgate. Then we get to the stage where we're piecing it together. CCTV, shoes and backpack straps. The identity of the bombers came slowly, but it came. Forensic teams matched fragments of personal items, driver's license, wallets, cell phones to bodies at the centre of each blast. CCTV footage from King's Cross revealed the 4 men walking in tight formation. Heavy backpacks clear, even in the grainy shots. Traces of tricetone, peroxide, TAP-T for short, confirmed the homemade nature of the devices. But the next morning, police had raided homes in Leeds, uncovering explosive residue and martyrdom videos. They didn't come from outside, they came from here. That was the hardest part to understand. Commentator on Sky News, July 8, 2005. And then the Prime Minister's return. Words amid ashes. At 12 p.m. on July 7, 2005, Tony Blair stepped out of the G8 summit in Gleneagles, Scotland, and returned to Downing Street. What was supposed to be a moment of diplomatic unity had turned into a national reckoning. His brief televised address came with resolute calm. Yet beneath his steely delivery, the country read the grief on his face. Cabinet ministers convened in emergency. Cobra was on full alert. The United Kingdom was now a homeland of frontline war. We were not just sympathising with other nations anymore. We had become them. Grief-stricken, angry, changed. Columnist The Guardian wrote. And then the hospitals were under siege, the day the wards overflowed. St Mary's, the Royal London, University College Hospital. These were no longer simply medical centres. They were triage zones for catastrophe. Over 700 injuries arrived across London's hospitals. Traumatic amputations, burns, blast lungs, PTSD, helicopters landed on rooftops. Nurses worked barefoot due to blood-slick floors. Volunteers poured in to donate blood. Phone lines rang with names of the missing. I held a mother's hand while her son was in surgery. She asked me if I thought he still had legs. I said yes. I lied. Trauma nurse, St Mary's Hospital, recounted. Religious leaders visited every ward, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Jewish, binding wounds, not only of flesh, but of faith. And then there's the psychological fallout. The terror never leaves. For survivors, healing wasn't just skin deep. In fact, it rarely was. Many began experiencing survivors' guilt within days. Why them? Why not me? Nightmares of smoke-filled tunnels, anxiety when entering stations, fear of strangers' backpacks. Therapy groups were overwhelmed. PTSD diagnosed spiked. Some never returned to the underground. London Ambulance Service staff, many of whom worked 20-hour shifts that day, required mental health support for years afterwards. Even now, when I hear a loud bang in the tube, I scan faces, I look for exits, I breathe like I'm about to drown. And that is a survivor from Edgware Road.